Hi.
Hello.
I'm actually really excited for this conversation because whenever you and I talk, synapses fire in new ways and I learn something. And so I think people listening to this are going to get something from it. I'm excited because I'm going to get something from it. And I hope that you're excited because you're always excited.
100%. And I agree with that. Like the soul apothecarist like label that you'd been kind of testing out for yourself definitely was one that I took from our last conversation. So 100%.
I love that. I'm going to start how I start all of these conversations.
Perfect.
For you in your life, what is sacrosanct? Whatever that word means for you.
I think life itself, like genuinely, I wake up like wowed by this possibility of existing. And I think for me, love is a very real force. That like so I live down here in Cornwall in the UK, and this is just a really random example. But when I first landed here, I stayed in the house of the late Hamish Miller, who was one of the UK's like top dowsers.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to watch a load of his old DVDs on dowsing. And one of the things they showed was you could douse the energy field of a tree. Then you could give that tree some love, like sing it a song, give it a hug, literally. And you could then douse the energy field after that, and the energy field would have expanded, right? So just for me, that like proof in like right up close and personal that love is a very real force that all life responds to. Therefore, for me, all life is sacred, all life is sacrosanct.
I feel like that just needs some space because it's true and beautiful, and something when we're too busy, we forget or don't respect or honor or, whatever that is. And I guess my kind of follow-up question for everyone is, and how do you honor that? Like, what is it that you do in your day-to-day life that allows it to be sacrosanct?
I think there's a couple of things, and this is an ongoing journey for me. Because one of the things we might touch on later is, some of the formative experiences that shape us, right? Yeah. So for me, finding ways, genuinely like finding ways to give love to myself, that's been a fairly recent journey, right? And yet one of the principles I've always operated by for a good, decade or so is like, let the forces of nature shape you into a force of nature. And so perhaps connected to that previous like example I shared around, dowsing a tree's energy field, I get to walk the coast parts of Cornwall, and I get to walk Trencrom Hill, which is just out the back of my house. And in both of those places, it's very hard to not feel some connection to the sacrosanct, because they are places of such power, beauty, and majesty. So definitely I can 100% get lost in the crazy head world of like, I'm trying to build a business and trying to, like, that happens, right? So there are times when I can fall out of that sacrosanct flow. And yet definitely nature is something that will always bring me back to that flow.
I think I'm the same. And for me, there's been an element of, like you said, it hasn't always been that way. I haven't been someone who has known how to love myself, how to be in life. Like, there was definitely, I was born that way. I was very in awe of life itself. And for me personally, I can't think of one defining or specific moment where that shifted and changed. But I do know that I lost connection to myself for a long time. And that the reason I do this work and I help other people know themselves, trust themselves, and express themselves is because there was a disconnection for me, and I didn't know myself, and I didn't trust myself, and I certainly I spent a long time feeling depressed because I was pushing down all of those parts of myself and not expressing who I was. And I now it is a non-negotiable that I get up and go for a walk. I get up and I sit, or I get up and I be, and I remind myself of the awe of life. And I wonder whether for you, like you said, there's the craziness, there's the head stuff. How's that journey been for you? Do you know if there was a moment where you lost connection to it, or has it always been there?
I think certainly like you, it was there early on. If I can look at a few moments, right? Like a dear kind of friend, big brother figure, mentor in my life. Was it like he's a master cabinet maker, but like, you know, he wouldn't call himself a kind of like wise man, but you know, he knows trees and wood like at a depth that most can't even fathom, right? And I remember we were on holiday together when I was about 7 years old, and he cut me a hazel staff. And as I look now, I'm literally looking at, right, so I can grab one for you now. So here is a hazel staff, right? So this is obviously stuck with me, okay? And so he cut me a hazel staff, and at that age, I couldn't quite put it into words, but there was something magical about this stick, because as boys, like particularly, like I don't want to make a gender pejorative statement, but like boys love to smash nettles with sticks, or certainly I did, and I've seen that in my son, you know. So I was like, oh my God, this is like the ultimate nettle smashing stick, right? And I then lost that stick for a number of years, and I found it again. And the joy at finding my stick, like, so there's definitely something there about that connection being there. And I remember, you know, probably one of the things that did go some way to suppress and shut that connection down was my experiences, you know, a decade at boarding school in the UK, right? And yet I do remember one particular day, like I was there during the summer, and I walked out, it's like one of those big rolling boarding schools with grounds and lakes and stuff, right? But I remember walking out and having a moment of like, almost like oneness consciousness, going, wow, I wonder if anyone else thinks about life like this. And like just this moment of like, oh wow, look at, I didn't have the words of like everything is connected, I am everything, but that was the experience I was having. So I do recognize that it was there, and yet I can, you know, look at perhaps the impact of that decade and go, okay, well, yeah, heading into my kind of late teens, early 20s, there was much more kind of the self-centered drunkenness, womanizing, all of that good stuff, right? And so yes, there was very much a disconnection from that, and over perhaps, you know, some awakening experiences, you know, through different plant medicines quite early on, with no integration, no awareness of what was going on, but literally life going, no mate, this is the path, dude, like just you're gonna figure this out, it's gonna be a bit of a ride, right? That connection, like I got chucked back in the deep end of that connection and floundered for a good few years going, can I even swim? And now start to kind of like, okay, there's a consciousness, there's an alignment, but it's, you know, it is very much ongoing. And more than anything else now, I think there is a relaxing into being held by Mother Earth and Father Sky, like that, our ultimate parents. Yeah.
You're one of the very few people in the world who, like most people, when I share any of my kind of story in terms of schooling and personal development and formative years and plant medicines unintegrated in fields with other kids I'd only just met, and then coming full circle into this place, there aren't very many people who I can share and resonate with in that same way. You know, most people, when I say, you know, I was around, you talking about dowsers and staffs being handed to you at 7, you know, this isn't normal. This isn't normal, right? It might be now, and I'm really glad that there are more and more people who are parenting in this way and who are giving their kids the kind of experiences that you and I, in some way, different ways, had when we were younger. My experience of it at the time was that it was not normal, and all I wanted to be was normal. And so I pushed away from the knowledge, the spiritual awakening, the awareness, the love that existed in all those spaces. And I ran towards television and mainstream life and cocaine and status and money. And I'm curious for you whether you had a similar journey in terms of that separation, or whether it was always both things ran alongside each other, or kind of how that was for you.
I think a bit of both, because like, say, even at boarding school, I was like the kind of slightly common kid, and I was the poor kid, right? We'd rock up with like, we had like the Subaru equivalent of a Ford Fiesta, basically, which is like a really small family car for those who kind of don't know what that is. And when you go to boarding school, right, you have these trunks, these big like trunks that you put your stuff into for the entire term, like, and you know, most of my peers would be like getting out of their Range Rovers or their Jaguars, like you know, with the butler getting the trunk out of the boot and stuff. And we'd rock up with this little like Subaru Justy, it was called, like this little mini car towing a trailer with the trunks in, right? Literally looking like we just come off the farm, because that I did live on a small holding, right? And so I think I had this kind of foot in both worlds even then, of like I was in that boarding school world and I wasn't, right? That boarding school world, insanely like the colonization of the mind in terms of status, empire, wealth, and those are the ways that you define your worth, right? 100%, you know, I'm still unpicking all of that for sure. And there was also something of like, yeah, this I'm not, I still would go home and my nearest neighbor would be half a mile away, and there was a herd of buffalo in the field above us, right? So there was still elements there for sure. And I think probably in what was your cocaine phase, mine was there for sure. I had a very heavy weed phase. Probably a good thing I didn't get into cocaine. I'm excitable enough as it is, right? But I did have, so I wanted that status. My, you know, dear friends and I, we started a UK hip hop record label, right? We wanted to like be UK hip hop like record label moguls like Jay-Z. So there was the status elements there, right?
Yeah.
And yet we also were passionate champions of this art form, because it provided a level of social commentary and realism that wasn't present in anything we were seeing in the mainstream, like the MTVs of the cars and the cribs and all that. Like, no, we're like, look, actually, these people are talking about fish and chips and, you know, what goes on at like Match of the Day and council estates and all this. And it was like, here is something that is an art form that can speak to our present experience. So we were really passionate about the potential for hip hop and rap, particularly in the UK, to create social good, even as we were also trying to do the status thing with having the record label around it. So those two elements were definitely present for sure.
That's really interesting. And in a beautiful way, like I kind of had a place I wanted to get to, and you kind of helped me get there in a way as well. So you said probably best I didn't get into the cocaine thing. It would have been too hyper. It didn't make me hyper. It made me normal, and it slowed me down, and it allowed me to have maybe 2 thoughts at the same time instead of 15. I now have an adult late diagnosis of ADHD and autism, and sit in this camp of actually autistic and a little bit ADHD, as diagnosed by a professional, and no longer just this part of me that is pushed and pulled between 2 worlds. And for me, those 2 worlds looked like, I want to make something of my life, I want to tell stories, I want, you know, TV, blah blah blah, and the career that I had there, and then the kind of the fields and the communities and doing mushrooms and telling, you know, hanging around fires and listening to each other and feeling the earth under my feet and kind of all of that. And for me, it's taken a million years to get to a place where this diagnosis, and I'm not someone for labels or diagnosis or allopathic medicine in any way, but it's like the diagnosis itself pulled these 2 worlds together for me, and has given me language and insight into myself that actually I don't think would have been useful then. And I'm really glad that I've got it now, because I see, like you, in your own way, I was really ahead of my time, but I wasn't ready. Like, things fall into place in the right way, in the right time. I was very impatient, and now I'm far less impatient, and things are falling into place, and the dots are joining up, and I can make sense of my life. And I say all of this because, you know, some of the stuff that you were doing very young was wacky and insane, and is now understood and landing on ears that are ready to hear it. And I also know that you had a diagnosis of ADHD not that long ago. And so I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on how that's shaped things or given a new insight for you.
So it is interesting what you talk about, the kind of the diagnosis pulling those 2 elements of your worlds together, right? And I also was lucky enough recently to kind of land on my feet with a therapist who's specializes in both boarding school and, you know, neurodivergence, right? So that's been a real gift. And I think one of the things that he, you know, shared in passing was that the idea that perhaps in earlier years, like, you know, millennia back, you know, those who were neurodiverse might well have been more like the mystics, because they had access to different ways of perceiving, knowing, experiencing, right? And for me, I think what's happening right now is I am seeing my capacity with words and ability to think at lightning speed around those like frameworks and words is really part of that genius zone that I'm bringing through into the other area, which is at the moment like building a business to support entrepreneurs over 50, which again, something I've never expected to do, but I see that almost, you know, life placing me where life needs me to be. And so it's 100% that, like, some of the most impactful sessions that we've run with our community members have been much, much more in the realm of, you know, letting the forces of nature shape you into a force of nature, much more in the realms of campfires and fields and woods than in the realms of here's your funnel and, you know, funnel automation. And now there's nothing wrong with like click-through rates and funnel automation. However, if those click-through rates and funnel automation are not grounded for me in something with roots, with depth, then they actually are not probably serving the real purpose they could serve. It's just my hunch on it right now.
I find all of that interesting. And I, you know, one of the things I've always thought about our age group, there's this little bridge of people who I think we're kind of 78 to 83, you know, real little bridge. And I've always seen us as these, you know, the Zennials, the kind of this bridge between a generation.
Bridge generation, 100%. Yeah, I've said that before as well. That it is like, and whether it's because of the analog childhood, digital adulthood, and or some other things as well, it's like we were kind of almost like we were conceived as greed became good, but we grew up as social consciousness began to develop, right? So there's also an interesting piece there of like, we're able to appreciate some of that, you know, what shaped the 80s, but also we're able to see forward into what was coming down the millennium, basically. So
that's a really interesting way of looking at it. You know, for me, it's I kind of think about, we had the freedom of there was far less information, right? Like when we in our childhoods, we were not yet in the information age. We were still very much in the kind of everyone in a square box do the same thing, produce the same thing kind of an age. And we watched, like halfway through our schooling, it became obsolete. I mean, it's completely obsolete now. But we had this, you know, there were not computers in schools when we started in school, and by the end, all of us had like what, teachers and students alike were like, what even is this? You know?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point as well, for sure. It's interesting. I remember programming like a really old BBC computer, like way back in the day, to like spit my name across the screen in like flashing neon colors and things, like some of those early computer, like there was a fascination. It was something super new and fresh. And looking back now, you used to buy computer magazines that would have the lines of code, and you would sit there, I would sit there like manually typing in these line after like hundreds and hundreds of lines of code to literally make my computer go, hello, George, in like pink letters. I don't know what that means, but it's just, there's something in that of like, we came up when it was, you couldn't just ask ChatGPT to write you $1 billion company, you know?
Well, and so the thought that actually had it spring any of that kind of a little blip of conversation into my mind was that life itself has landed you in this position where you're specifically working with entrepreneurs over 50, and who better place to be able to do that, because you're actually right on the edge of understanding, seeing them, being able to speak their language and listen to and receive what is going on for them, whilst then also offering a doorway or a bridge into the future. And that's what sprung that up for me.
And interestingly, on the bridge piece as well, though, like the previous decade and a half, my main focus of work typically would be with the younger generation. So either going into what were called pupil referral units, like where, you know, the kids get sent who really have challenges with education and with an obsolete system, right? And will throw chairs and spit and swear at you because of that, right? Right across to, you know, working with, you know, young men through rites of passage, you know, and initiation weekends and things. So there's that's been, it's interesting that now I'm also like, I'm holding both of those elements, because I still get calls and asked about working with young people, and I'm now directly working with the older generation. So it's really, it's fascinating to reflect on that with you.
It is, and one of the reasons I love our conversations is that we have, like, I see it, what we do is alchemy and holding. I use this word maven. My grandma brought it to me in a dream years ago. No one else was using it yet, and now it seems to be more prevalent in society. But she came to me with this word maven, which was an expert by experience. It's an old Hebrew word, and it also means being able to hold more than one truth in your palm of your hand. Me, that's been a real part of who I am and how I do life and business and relationship, and all of it is holding those nuanced things and being able to exist in liminal spaces and pull different ideas together. And for me, it's really, really interesting to have these chats from time to time with you, and to see you and experience you doing it doing a very similar thing, but in a very different way. There's a part of me that doesn't know whether that's just personality or whether it's a masculine, feminine polarity piece, and like how we approach the world. And so that's something I also wanted to kind of touch on. How has learning about and coming to understand polarity and gender in a world that seems kind of obsessed with it right now, because it's evolving, I think. How has that shifted and moved through your experience in your life recently?
Yes, that's definitely one for sure. I think there's a few levels for it. Like, one is that I recognize, and I don't know much about like astrology and all that sort of stuff. Like, Aries fire sign. Like, I'm quite like right, and that when I try and like hold back that natural urge, right? Like, it's not me and my flow. Equally, like, I do have a mind that's quite like solution focused, like problem solving, right? And 100% there are times when I need to sit back and go, okay, like, sorry, are we in listening mode here, or are we in solutions mode, right? And so equally, but to not dim that gift, to be like, look, actually, if we are in solutions mode, like, hey, welcome to my zone, and I think the big piece on a personal level has been to begin to give myself permission to lead within a relationship, and to give myself permission to ask for what I need, and like actually being okay, like, look, cool, like the person with may not want to move in that direction, that's cool, but actually saying, hey, here's what I'd like. And from that place, because before, like, there were times when I would not actually allow myself to fully step into that masculine polarity, right? And I would yeah, sure, no problem. Like, and there's no center, there's no solidity, and therefore, and this is my
whole
take.
Body response to that, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, it feels so different.
Yeah.
And it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so that ultimately there's no safety. If there's no solidity, there's no safety. And so that's been, and it's an ongoing journey for sure, because and I can't pin down all the reasons why, but I do know that for me, to be able to say, hey, this is what I want, and also to allow myself to receive. I was just discussing this last night, was like, some of the ways in which I've stayed safe is by creating dependency loops where I will overdo, I will do too much. And then when the person, when that person like hits back at me because I'm disempowering them by doing too much, I'm like, I get all victimy and whiny, right? And actually to start to just, what's the word, slough, where you shed your shell, right? To let go of all of those patterns is a real ongoing thing. And I think it's this idea that unfortunately right now there is a conflating of strength and authentic masculine polarity with toxicity, and it's horseshit. It really is, like, fundamentally. Okay, for me, you can have whatever opinion you want, but what I see is like, ultimately nice guys are not safe, because they are typically, that doesn't mean you can't be loving and kind. There's a big difference, right? I'm using nice guy in the kind of sense that Robert Glover wrote the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, right? Where actually you're not showing up as your whole, full, true, authentic self. and therefore, how can you meet someone in their true, full, authentic self as they wish to be met? So it's definitely live for me, and I think amazing. We have kind of a quote unquote modern men's movement that's supporting this process, right? Yeah. It has its own shadows, it has its own challenges. Like there's the navel gazing of some of these groups, there's the, you know, unintegrated, unheld space of other groups. But overall, there is an effort to move towards like men stepping into a version of masculinity that actually feels authentic and wholesome for them, and for women who are in that same place. And again, this is, you know, gender terms aren't, you know, it's just, we're just rolling with it as it is, right?
Yeah.
That is what's been desired for a long, long time. And so yeah, it's like, it's one of the most important things, because how can you have physical attraction if there's no established polarity? Like that's, you know, these are some of the fundamental core cliches of, like, you know, opposites attract, right? Now I'd love your take on this, right? Opposites attract, but like attracts like. Talk me through that. Like, now, as someone who can hold two competing truths, there we go. Right? I'd love to get your take on this, because I'm chewing on this one.
Because attraction all the time isn't useful, right? Because we've also got to, these days in the modern environment, we also need to create harmony. And here's the thing, with all, for my take on polarity is it's and the lesson, when in this moment we're talking about polarity teachings and the lessons and the work that is existing in the world. It's a really useful tool to really understand your own masculine and your own feminine, and to heal both of those in each person. And if you're a masculine essence being, to lead with that, and if you're a female or a feminine essence being, to lead with that. I do not think it's ever healthy to be entirely masculine or entirely feminine, because we need both, because we're in, you know, we're also individuals, and part of our journey is to individuate. So I need to heal my own inner masculine, you need to heal your own inner feminine as well as, right? So there's that piece, and that, I feel like that's really, really important, because we're not just working on the part of us that is our essence, we're working on both parts to have a healthy integrated relationship with them. And then within myself, the journey has been, first of all, to create harmony within them, within me, so that I can transition from one to the other, where I'm not projecting on particularly the men in my life to be the masculine for me, right? but actually able to find that within myself and do it within myself, and then also ask sometimes, or drop into the really gooey feminine place, so that there is polarity created. And so for me, it's really about choosing the moment and having the space and the tools to know, and when it's time to be in polarity and create attraction, and when it's time to be, you know, parenting or running a household or getting us somewhere, which actually works much better if we can be in harmony. And that might mean, let's get on the same page, we're both working towards this thing in our masculine, or we might both be in our feminine, and really be in this nurturing place to hold sick kids for a bit. So it gets to be a tool that gives us choice rather than being the only way. And I think what I see in the world is people getting very dogmatic about it.
100%.
Which happens with everything, right?
I really like the language you've brought through. I really appreciate that. Really like that a lot.
Good. Well, I told you we'd listen, we'd learn. It'll be fun. You are working on, as always, lots of different things. We've covered most of them. Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. I think the only piece that sparked for me, as you were saying there, is like that the more we can tend to our own inner masculine and feminine, then the more we establish our sovereignty. So that feels like a really key piece, that ultimately, you spoke about, you and I tend to be, perhaps because of our wiring, ahead of our time. We see, like, we can feel things coming and perceive them before we perhaps have the full language for them. And at the start of 2020, I said, for me, we're stepping into the decade of sovereignty. One of the ways that I'm wired is I pick up on words and I just start to see sovereignty being mentioned as a concept, even though different people would mean it in different ways. But I'm like, there is a rising pulse of sovereignty emerging. And so for me, that feels an important thing to mention, is that, like, I do believe everything we've seen in the world since then, bodily autonomy choices around medical treatments and all that sort of stuff, like all of this is conversations around sovereignty and what it means to be sovereign beings on a sovereign planet, right? So
I find that really interesting. I had 6 or 7 years ago, I created a mastermind called Claiming the Castle, which was all about this, right? It was in an actual castle near Bristol. It was about claiming your inner king or your inner queen, and no one fucking signed up, and I made a massive loss on it. And if I did it now, it would be time, right? And the not beating myself up for being wrong and noticing the right timing of things has been a huge part of my journey. And for me, it's less about, I mean, it's the same, but different. It's less about sovereignty right now, but self-leadership or inner leadership. And if we can, I'm setting us up for the next bit. So in Sacrosanct Secrets, I want us to talk about circle versus triangle, which
nice.
you and I talked about on your podcast a little while ago, and I want to pick that up to do. But for me, that is the difference in a way between where we've been and where we're heading. Is this, before there had to be one. If you're listening to this, you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm making a triangle. There used to be like one leader and many people under that, and we're now moving into this place where we can have a circle, and we can have this kind of inner leadership where we're all holding hands, either facing inwards or facing outwards, to kind of claim or look after one another and the world, and that feels very exciting.
Nice. Well, definitely tune into Sacrosanct Secrets, like the is it always a Patreon edition, or what? Because like there's a really nice distinction I'll share with you around the concepts of synergy as well. So I'm looking forward to doing it.
Fantastic. And I am going to try and find the link at some point for the conversation you and I had on your podcast, so I can stick it in so they can hear us.
I'll get that to you, no problem at all.
Perfect. Thank you. If people want to come find you, carry on the conversation, hear about what you're up to, learn about your projects, where's the best place for them to come?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, just George Hardwick. The company that we are running around supporting entrepreneurs over 50 is called Greater Life. So George Hardwick, Greater Life, you're going to find it on the Google. I've also got georgehardwick.net. That's my own kind of personal site. You can get a copy of my book, all that good stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic. I will stick all the links in and make sure that they are clickable and correct.
Perfect.
For ease. Thank you.
Very welcome. Very enjoyable. Thank you.